They laughed when I bent down to pick up the napkin. My name is Marin Lockridge. I'm the oldest daughter in a family that never had room for quiet women. I've been called distant, odd, even invisible. But tonight, for the first time, they were about to see me, really see me. It happened in the middle of pizza night, over cheap red wine and melted mozzarella, the way betrayals often do, disguised as something harmless. Lisa, my younger sister, had just snapped Marin, "Can you at least be useful?" as she flung a crumpled napkin in my direction. I picked it up without a word. That's when he stood. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Cross. A guest at the table. A man they thought was just Lisa's new boyfriend. His voice was steady, deliberate, cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Rear Admiral Marin Lockridge," he said with a sharp nod. "Ma'am?" The room collapsed into silence. Lisa froze mid-sentence, her fork in the air. My father blinked. My mother's mouth hung open mid-laugh. And me, I was still holding the damn napkin. In that moment, 5 seconds long and 10 years overdue, the weight of every dinner I'd sat through without being asked a single question shifted. And I knew. This wasn't just pizza night. This was my reckoning. They laughed when I bent down to pick up the napkin. My name is Marin Lockridge. I'm the oldest daughter in a family that never had room for quiet women. I've been called distant, odd, even invisible, but tonight, for the first time, they were about to see me, really see me. It happened in the middle of pizza night, over cheap red wine and melted mozzarella, the way betrayals often do, disguised as something harmless. Lisa, my younger sister, had just snapped. "Marin, can you at least be useful?" as she flung a crumpled napkin in my direction. I picked it up without a word. That's when he stood. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Cross. A guest at the table. A man they thought was just Lisa's new boyfriend. His voice was steady, deliberate, cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Rear Admiral Marin Lockridge," he said with a sharp nod. "Ma'am." The room collapsed into silence. Lisa froze mid-sentence, her fork in the air. My father blinked. My mother's mouth hung open mid-laugh. And me, I was still holding the damn napkin. In that moment, 5 seconds long and 10 years overdue, the weight of every dinner I'd sat through without being asked a single question shifted. And I knew this wasn't just pizza night. This was my reckoning. I used to think if I just stayed quiet long enough, they'd forget I was there. Turns out they did gladly. At the Lockridge family table, there was always an extra chair, but never an extra space. Lisa, the youngest, was the golden one, former pageant girl turned military nurse, all filtered selfies and orchestrated humble brags. My brother Ryan, the middle child, never held a job for more than 6 months, but still managed to be the comic relief. And then there was me, Marin, the one who went to some base out west. Logistics, I think. Admin, maybe. They never got it right. They never asked. Dad once introduced me to a neighbor. As our oldest, she helps with supplies, I think, behind the scenes. Mom added, "She's not into the spotlight. That's okay, not everyone needs to be front and center." And Lisa? She smiled sweetly and said, "Marin's basically retired early. She's good with spreadsheets. I stopped correcting them years ago. When I joined the Navy at 18, no one came to my boot camp graduation. Dad said flights were expensive. Mom mailed a card with a coupon for a dry cleaner. I still have it. I'm not sure why. The older I got, the easier it became for them to shrink me down to fit their idea of me, harmless, distant single. They made my silence small when it was actually the sharpest thing I owned. They didn't know I'd trained in Arctic warfare or coordinated joint extractions under the Defense Intelligence veil. They didn't care. The quieter I became, the more comfortable they were, so I stayed quiet. Even when Lisa used my eulogy for Grandma Elise copied straight from a letter I sent her months before she passed. Even when I showed up in uniform once for Thanksgiving, and Lisa told me I was being performative. Even when Ryan called me the towel lady to a date. Even then I stayed. Because I knew something they didn't. Silence is not surrender. It's a delay, a decision, a tactic. And tonight, sitting at that same long oak table with pizza grease staining the napkins, and Lisa's voice rising louder than necessary, I felt it. The weight of the room, the way it tilted the moment Cross said my name, my real name. They didn't know it yet. But everything was about to break. They think silence means I had nothing to say. What they never realized is I've spent the last 10 years gathering more than words. I gathered storms. I was 21 when I was first deployed Arctic coast, a dead zone on the map. No welcome signs, no cell towers, just sharp wind and shadows that didn't belong to anything human. I remember lying in a freezing bunk the night we lost comms. My hands were bleeding through the gloves. Someone whispered we wouldn't make it. I didn't answer. I just kept writing contingency routes by flashlight. That mission never officially happened. Most of mine didn't. Over the years, I learned to command silence the way others command rooms. I rose through a system that rewards precision, discretion, endurance. I never asked for medals, but I earned more than most who spoke twice as loud. At 34, I was promoted to Rear Admiral and transferred to Spectre Division 7 classified operations. We didn't wear name tags. We didn't get press releases. But our fingerprints are on the parts of the world where the lights stayed on because we never let them go out. They never knew. And I never told them. Because the few times I tried, like the time I sent a photo of my unit to Mom, she replied, "You look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" Once I hinted to Dad that I'd been moved into a strategic planning role at the Pentagon. He grunted and said, "Still an admin, huh?" They wanted a version of me that made them feel superior, so I gave it to them. I watched Lisa bask in spotlight after spotlight. Her every photo framed, every nursing award turned into a Facebook post with a caption like, "Just doing my part." She called me paranoid when I mentioned keeping my records secured, told me I was being too rigid. But I wasn't being paranoid when I saw her name on the access logs. She used my credentials, pulled my reports, quoted my debrief strategies verbatim in a promotion packet that got her a position she didn't earn. I traced it. I archived the logs. I filed nothing. Because silence, like I said, is tactical. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one they forgot to watch. I let her steal. Not because I was weak, but because I was waiting. Waiting for her to think she'd won. For her to bring me here tonight like some prop in her perfect life, still believing I was the girl she buried under false memories and gaslighting. And then she brought Nathan Cross. She didn't know I'd trained him, signed off his deployment file, sent him into his first unsanctioned op. She didn't know he owed me his life. But I knew. I knew the second I read her message, "Don't dress formal." And I thought, good, let's not dress anything up. Let's serve it raw. The front door creaked as I stepped in. Same worn rug, same citrus-scented candle Mom always overburned. I could hear laughter from the kitchen, the loud, curated kind people do when they know they're being watched. Except no one in that house ever watched me. Lisa looked up first. Her smile froze for half a second. Then she chirped, "Oh good, you made it," like she hadn't double-checked 5 times hoping I wouldn't. She tossed a napkin in my direction. "Can you grab that? Might as well be useful." I picked it up without a word. Cross sat near the end of the table, 2 seats down from Dad, already halfway through a beer. He didn't recognize me. Not yet. He'd only ever known me as Lockridge Never Marin. And the version Lisa described to him probably sounded like a retired librarian who once helped build spreadsheets for the Coast Guard. Dinner was loud, too loud. Lisa dominated the conversation with stories from her base, how she organized a surprise baby shower for a medic, how one of the interns fainted drawing blood. Ryan added his usual punchlines, something about getting stuck in a lift with a ferret. Everyone laughed. No one looked at me. I reached for water, empty. No one offered to refill it. Lisa glanced over, shrugged, and said, "We weren't sure you were actually coming. Thought maybe you'd just grab something on your way home." She winked at Cross. "She's always been unpredictable." Cross raised an eyebrow. "You didn't say she was military." Lisa laughed. "Oh God, no. Not like us. She did some civil logistics, or VA clerical stuff, I think. Right, Marin, I let silence stretch. Let it crawl over the table like fog." Ryan snorted. "Weren't you on a ship once?" "Like stuck on one of those floating soup cans for 6 months, Mom added. "She sent a postcard from Guam once. No return address. Said it was classified, but come on. Probably just folding laundry near the radar." Another wave of laughter. Cross stopped chewing. "You said she worked in logistics," he said, voice low. Lisa nodded too fast. "Medical logistics. Mostly desk stuff. I think." I looked at him, then let him really see me. Still nothing. Until Lisa announced time for the pizza game, a family ritual. Everyone picked a topping and told a funny secret. Lisa chose pineapple. I kissed my TA to pass pharmacology. Ryan picked mushrooms hooked up in a porta potty at Coachella. They skipped me. Lisa waved it off. Marin doesn't do secrets. She just disappears for 10 years and comes back with a new haircut. Cross turned slowly. You didn't serve with her, Lisa scoffed. God, no. I'm in patient care. She's more civilian adjacent. I held his gaze. Strange. Last I checked, Spectre Division 7 wasn't exactly civilian anything. The fork fell from his hand, and everything else fell with it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was surgical. Cross sat up straighter. His eyes scanned my face like he was seeing a ghost. Or worse, a superior officer he hadn't saluted. Lisa turned to me, half laughing, half defensive. What's Spectre 7? She asked too loud. Is that another one of your cryptic little hobbies? I reached for a slice of lukewarm pizza. Just a unit. Small, classified. Most people don't talk about it at family dinners. Lisa scoffed, but her laugh was thinner now, almost brittle. You're being dramatic. Ryan jumped in, chuckling nervously. Classic Marin. Always the secret agent. But Cross wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, slowly, voice low. Did you say Spectre Division 7? I didn't look at him. I just nodded once. He turned toward Lisa. You never told me she was Inspector. She looked confused, then panicked. I didn't know. I mean, she never confirmed anything. She barely tells us where she lives. That's not entirely true, I said, calmly wiping my mouth. You knew enough to access my files, or at least enough to borrow my credentials. The room froze. Mom set her wine glass down carefully. What are you talking about? I met Lisa's eyes. 2 years ago, someone accessed my classified reports through a shared base drive, logged in from Fort Wendell. The credentials traced back to your name. Lisa's face drained of color. You're insane. Cross didn't blink. You used her files. No. Her voice cracked. I pulled some examples for a research packet. Everyone does it. It wasn't even for anything major. You used operation reports marked confidential. You quoted her strategic debriefs. You even listed her Arctic campaign under your humanitarian initiative. Lisa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She was never supposed to come tonight. There it was. The slip. The moment control shattered. Mom looked between us, stunned. Lisa, is that true? Dad finally spoke, his voice quiet. You told us she worked admin. Lisa spun toward me, hands shaking. You don't get to play the victim, Marin. You disappeared for years. You let us believe things. No, I said softly. You believed what made you comfortable. I just stopped correcting you. Cross stood. Admiral Lockridge, he said formally, with a slight incline of his head. Permission to speak freely. I gave him a slow nod. He pulled up a file on his phone and began reading Rear Admiral Marin Lockridge, Commander Spectre, Division 7, Joint Operations Valor Citation, Arctic Reconnaissance Distinguished Service Medal, testified under seal before Joint Congressional Intelligence Review. A sharp breath from Mom, a muttered curse from Ryan, and Lisa just stared. I trained him, I said, voice level. 5 years ago. He was green too loud and brave as hell. Cross looked at Lisa. And you knew, or suspected. But you stole from her anyway. I didn't think she'd show up, Lisa whispered. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap, and exhaled. You invited a ghost, Lisa. You just didn't know which one would answer. Lisa's face contorted rage and shame, twisting into something sharp and reckless. She pointed at me like a cornered animal voice, shrill. You think this makes you better? You disappear for a decade and then drop in like some war hero. You let us believe lies. I didn't flinch. No, I let you tell yourselves what you needed to sleep at night. I was just tired of correcting fiction. Mom turned to me, desperate. But why, Marin? Why wouldn't you just tell us? I laughed once, low and flat. Tell you what? That I led operations you'll never be cleared to read. That I've carried silence heavier than your judgment. You wouldn't have heard it. You would have turned it into a joke, just like always. Dad rubbed his temples the way he used to when taxes didn't add up. You were always the quiet one, but Lisa had the ambition. No, I said sharply. Lisa had the spotlight. That's not the same thing. Ryan stood, muttered something about needing air, and disappeared into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open, then close. He didn't come back. Cross stepped beside me. I've already reported the credential breach to my CO. If it's what it appears to be, a formal investigation will follow. Lisa's voice cracked. You're not serious. I am, he said. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about protocol. About lives potentially endangered by an unauthorized breach. She turned to Mom, wild-eyed. Say something. Tell them this is ridiculous. But Mom only looked down at the table, her fingers wrapped around her empty glass. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I stood then, slowly. No dramatics. Just enough to make the floor creak beneath me. You wanted me small, I said. Because small made you feel big. Because if I spoke too clearly, stood too tall, I'd remind you that love isn't a performance, and I never fit your script. Lisa was trembling now, the mask fully gone. You don't get to lecture me. I don't need to, I replied. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because you finally invited me and I accepted. Her knees buckled slightly as she sat back down, like the strength had drained right out of her spine. I moved to the hallway in silence. No one stopped me. Not this time. I paused at the mirror near the door. I could see the whole table, from there. Cross still standing, Lisa collapsed inward. Mom staring at nothing. Dad blank as drywall. The room wasn't just quiet. It was gutted. They didn't know if this was the end of a show or the start of a reckoning. Either way, the performance was over, and for once, the silence belonged to them. The air outside hit colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold that bites, but the kind that makes you aware of your breath. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the night settle over my skin. Behind me, through the curtained window, the house was still lit like a stage left burning, long after the actors had dropped their lines. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done. I walked to my car without looking back, my footsteps steady on the cracked stone path Dad never bothered to repair. The engine turned over with a low growl, familiar grounding. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. Only once I reached the edge of the cul-de-sac did I open the glove compartment. The envelope was still there. A yellowing piece of paper sealed in tape that had started to curl. My grandmother Elise had written it the year she died. It had sat untouched for 6 years. Until tonight. I tore it open with a slow, deliberate rip, the paper soft like old cotton. Marin, I see you. I always did. You are thunder wrapped in restraint. Don't let their blindness convince you to dim. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate. You don't owe them noise. You owe yourself truth. And the truth is, they will never understand your strength because it doesn't come from being adored. It comes from standing alone and not flinching. Love, Grandma. The words didn't break me. They stitched me back together. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the console beside me. I thought of the first night I stood watch on a carrier deck, wind slicing past my face boots slick with salt. I remember wondering if home would ever understand who I had to become out there. The kind of woman who makes impossible calls, who writes plans that never leave paper, who sees the world through layers of contingencies. Now I had my answer. They didn't understand. But that was never the failure. I pulled onto the highway, the road wide and empty. No one called, no texts buzzed in. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt earned. I thought about Lisa still sitting at that table, replaying the moment Cross stood and saluted. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. Just the hollow ache of knowing she had all the chances to be decent and traded them for borrowed power. I let the ache pass. That too was a choice. 2 days later, Cross called me. His voice was formal at first until I told him I wasn't interested in charges. Let the system work, I said. This isn't about punishment, not anymore. He hesitated, then said something I hadn't expected. When you trained me, you told me the most powerful weapon wasn't firepower, it was clarity. I didn't understand then. I do now. I didn't respond. He didn't need me to. I ended the call, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. Sometimes the sharpest justice doesn't arrive with sirens or verdicts. Sometimes it arrives in silence and truth, in the way someone finally calls you by the name they never earned the right to ignore. And in that silence, I finally heard myself. 3 weeks passed before anyone from my family reached out. It wasn't Lisa. It was Mom. She left a voicemail that started with a sigh and ended with a request to come by for coffee, no drama. I listened to it once, deleted it, and didn't save the number. There was no hatred in my refusal, just understanding. Some doors don't close with a slam. Some just stop opening. I didn't hear from Lisa again. But I did hear about an internal investigation at Fort Wendell, a reassignment to an auxiliary care unit in Montana. Nothing formal yet, but her ascent had stalled, and still I didn't smile at the news. Because this was never about watching her fall. It was about proving to myself that I had always been standing. One quiet morning, I returned to base housing and unpacked the last of my deployment boxes. At the bottom of one was a medal I never displayed. I placed it in a drawer beside Grandma's letter. Not for show, for remembrance. That afternoon, I went for a walk near the northern fence line. The sky was wide, the kind of endless that makes you feel like the earth is finally giving you room to breathe. I paused by the old signal tower and looked back at the path I'd walked to get there. There had been years of silence, of shrinking, of letting others write my story. But no more. They called me invisible. But ghosts don't vanish. They haunt. They endure. And some like me don't fade to make others comfortable. We rise quietly. So when the next invitation comes, if it ever does, I'll do what I did that night. I'll pick up the napkin, and I'll let the truth walk into the room first.